Welcome to WWO Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. Throughout occupied Europe, the German Reichsbahn, the state railway, became an artery of extermination. It was a logistical masterpiece of pure evil, a vast network of steel tracks and timetables meticulously engineered not for commerce or travel, but for the systematic deportation of millions to their deaths. From the ghettos of Poland to the cities of France and the Netherlands, the rhythmic clatter of train wheels became the soundtrack of the Holocaust. These were not passenger trains, they were rolling prisons. Most often they were simple cattle cars or freight wagons, windowless boxes of splintered wood and cold steel. The conditions inside were beyond comprehension. People were crammed in, sometimes 100 or more to a single car, with no food, no water, and only a single bucket for sanitation. The journeys could last for days, a torturous limbo of darkness, suffocation, and despair. In this vast, horrifyingly efficient system, acts of sabotage were rare and perilous. Stories sometimes circulate of heroic German railwaymen derailing trains to save lives, but historical records show this to be a pervasive myth. The system was too rigid, the oversight too severe. To interfere was to sign one's own death warrant. The Belgian National Railway Company, like others in occupied nations, was co-opted into this machinery. Under German direction, its locomotives and its tracks were used to transport thousands of Jews and Roma from Belgian soil to the killing centers in the east. Central to this operation in Belgium was a single, grim location, a former army barracks that would become the final departure point for thousands, an antechamber of death known as the Dawson Barracks in the city of Mechelen. The city of Mechelen, strategically located between Brussels and Antwerp, was chosen by the occupying German forces for its ideal railway connections. Here, they established the SS Sammelage Mechelen, a transit camp housed within the red brick walls of the Dawson Barracks. It became the central hub for the deportation of Jews and Roma from Belgium. Between 1942 and 1944, this single location served as the gateway to Auschwitz-Birkenau for over 25,000 people. Life inside the Kaserne Dawson was a bureaucratic and dehumanizing prelude to the horrors that awaited. Upon arrival, prisoners were stripped of their identities and possessions. Their names were replaced with numbers, their belongings confiscated. Families were often separated in the chaotic processing. The barracks were stark and overcrowded, with minimal sanitation and meager rations designed only to keep the prisoners alive long enough for the next transport. The psychological torment was immense. The uncertainty, the rumors, and the constant presence of armed SS guards created an atmosphere of perpetual fear. Yet, the true purpose of Mechelen was kept deliberately vague by the Germans. The official line was that the prisoners were being sent to labor camps in the east. This deception was a crucial tool to prevent panic and resistance. Every few weeks, the camp would stir with activity. Lists were called out, and hundreds of men, Women and children were herded from their barracks onto the railway siding that ran directly into the courtyard. There, they were forced into the waiting cattle cars. These organized deportations were known simply as transports, each assigned a Roman numeral. Transport I, Transport II, and so on, a clinical naming convention for journeys into oblivion. By the spring of 1943, 19 such transports had already departed Mechelen, carrying thousands to their fate. For the prisoners, the departure of a train was a moment of terror. For the German administration, it was a matter of logistics and scheduling, a routine part of the final solution. As the machinery of deportation ground on, a small flame of resistance flickered in the oppressive darkness of occupied Brussels. It was a circle of young, idealistic friends, students at the Free University of Brussels, who refused to stand by as their fellow citizens were shipped to an unknown, but undoubtedly horrific, fate. The charismatic leader of this small cell was Youra Livschitz, a 25-year-old Jewish doctor. Intelligent, brave, and driven by a profound sense of justice, Livschitz was the intellectual and spiritual core of the group. He had already been involved in smuggling Jewish children to safety and was determined to do something more, something dramatic. His closest collaborators were two of his former classmates. Robert Maistriau, a 22-year-old medical student, was a quiet, determined young man known for his practical skills and unwavering loyalty. Jean Franklemon, also 22, was a passionate and courageous art student. Together, they represented a potent combination of intellect, practicality, and audacity. The trio had connections to a larger Belgian resistance network, the Group G, which specialized in sabotage. They had heard the increasingly terrifying rumors about what was happening in the East. They knew the stories of labor camps were a lie. They understood that the transports leaving Mechelen were not journeys to work, but one-way trips to extermination. Their resolve was hardened by a sense of shared humanity and a refusal to be passive accomplices to genocide. They felt a moral imperative to act, no matter the risk. The idea of attacking a train was born from this desperation. They knew they lacked the resources for a large-scale military operation. They had no explosives, no heavy weapons, and no formal military training. But they had something more powerful, an unshakable belief that even a small act of defiance could make a difference. It was a chance, however slim, to save lives and to strike a symbolic blow against the seemingly invincible Nazi war machine. The plan devised by Livschitz and his friends was characterized by its stunning simplicity and immense danger. They rejected the idea of using explosives or attempting to derail the train. Such an act would likely kill the very people they were trying to save and would bring swift, brutal retaliation on the local population. Their weapon of choice was far more subtle: light. They would use a single hurricane lantern, its glass covered with red tissue paper, to mimic an official railway emergency signal. The idea was to trick the German locomotive driver into believing there was a hazard on the line, forcing the entire convoy to a controlled stop. It was a psychological gambit, relying on the driver's ingrained obedience to railway protocols. Once the train was stationary, the second phase of the plan would commence. The team would be armed with just one pistol for protection and a set of bolt cutters and pliers. Their goal was to race alongside the halted train, pry open as many wagon doors as possible, and yell for the prisoners to run for their lives into the darkness of the surrounding countryside. The success of the entire operation hinged on speed, surprise, and the element of confusion. They spent days conducting reconnaissance, scouting the railway line between Mechelen and the German border. They needed a location that was remote enough to avoid immediate detection, but offered cover for the escaping prisoners. They settled on a stretch of track near the village of Bortmeerbeek, where a gentle curve in the line would force the train to slow down, giving the driver more time to see their signal and react. Their equipment was meager. The pistol was old, the bolt cutters were standard tools, and the lantern was a common household item. They had no getaway car, planning to escape on bicycles. This was not a military commando raid. It was an act of civil disobedience carried out by 3 students with more courage than resources. They knew the risks were astronomical. The train would be guarded by a squad of Schutzpolizei, or German security police, who were under orders to shoot anyone attempting to escape or interfere. Failure meant certain capture, torture, and execution. But for them, the risk of inaction was even greater. On the evening of April 19, 1943, the 20th convoy prepared to depart from the Dawson barracks. This transport, designated Transport XX, was different from its predecessors. For the first time, the Germans were using not only standard third-class passenger carriages, but also freight cars with barred windows and doors locked from the outside. A total of 1,631 men, women, and children were forced aboard. Among them was an 11-year-old boy named Simon Gronowski, traveling with his mother. The atmosphere was thick with dread. As the heavy doors slid shut and the bolts were thrown, the prisoners were plunged into near-total darkness. The air inside quickly grew stale and heavy with the smell of fear. The train, pulled by a powerful steam locomotive, lurched into motion around 10 p.m. Its wheels began their relentless rhythm on the steel tracks, carrying its human cargo eastward toward Auschwitz. The journey was scheduled to take 3 days. As the train rumbled through the Belgian countryside, the 3 young resistance fighters were already in position. The night was dark and cold. A nervous energy filled the air as they waited by the tracks between Bortmeerbeek and Hocht. Youra Livschitz acted as the lookout. Jean Franklemon was tasked with placing the red lantern on the tracks at the precise moment. Robert Maistriau, clutching the pliers and the group's only pistol, prepared to make the dash for the wagons. They could hear the train long before they saw it, a distant rumble that grew into a deafening roar, the piercing shriek of its whistle cutting through the night. The single headlight of the locomotive appeared around the bend, a cyclopean eye slicing through the darkness. The fate of 1,631 people and the lives of the 3 young men hung in the balance of the next few minutes. Everything depended on the German train driver, obeying the simple red light that was about to appear in his path. The moment of truth had arrived. As the locomotive steamed closer, its piston rods driving rhythmically, Youra Livschitz gave the signal. Jean Franklemon, his heart pounding, dashed onto the tracks and placed the hurricane lamp, glowing with its makeshift red filter, directly in the path of the oncoming train. The three men flattened themselves against the ground in a ditch, waiting. The train driver, a German Wehrmacht soldier, saw the red light, the universal signal for stop. Reacting on instinct and training, he slammed on the brakes. A deafening screech of metal on metal filled the night air as the massive train ground to a halt, steam hissing from its cylinders. The guards aboard the train, a contingent of Schutzpolizei, were momentarily thrown into confusion. An unscheduled stop in the middle of the Belgian countryside was highly unusual. They peered out into the darkness, trying to understand the cause of the delay. That moment of confusion was the only window the resistance fighters had. Robert Maistriau sprang into action. He ran from their hiding place towards the dark shapes of the freight cars. Adrenaline surged through him as he reached the first wagon. He fumbled with his pliers, his hands struggling to find a purchase on the heavy bolt securing the door. The prisoners inside, startled by the sudden stop, began to murmur, their faces pressed against the small, barred openings. Maistriau worked frantically, the sound of his tools drowned out by the hissing of the locomotive. He shouted at the people inside, telling them that they had a chance to escape, that they must be ready to run. His voice was a beacon of hope in their suffocating darkness. The German guards, realizing something was wrong, started to shout commands and move along the length of the train. The element of surprise was evaporating with every passing second. Time was running out. With a final, desperate twist of his pliers, Robert Maistriau broke the lock on the first wagon. He wrenched the heavy sliding door open, revealing the terrified faces of the prisoners packed inside. He yelled at them, his words a frantic plea. "Get out! Run! You are free!" For a moment the prisoners hesitated, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Jumping from a train in the middle of the night into enemy territory seemed as dangerous as staying put. But then the instinct for survival took over. One man jumped, then another, and then a small flood of people began pouring out of the wagon. In the ensuing chaos, the German guards opened fire. The sharp crack of rifles shattered the night, bullets whizzing past the fleeing figures. The three resistance fighters, having achieved their primary goal, were forced to retreat under a hail of gunfire, disappearing back into the darkness. But the fuse they had lit continued to burn. Their audacious act had ignited a spark of hope and defiance throughout the entire train. In other wagons, prisoners who had smuggled small tools, files, saws, even spoons, began frantically working on the locks and floorboards. Inspired by the commotion outside, their desperation turned into action. Men and women worked together in the dark, tearing at the wooden planks of the cattle cars. The attack by the three men had created a crucial diversion, occupying the guards and giving others the time they needed. In total, 231 people would attempt to escape from Transport XX that night. While Maistriau's direct action freed 17 people from one car, the chain reaction he started enabled many more. An 11-year-old Simon Gronowski felt his mother push him towards the opening of their wagon, her last words urging him to run. He jumped and survived. In the end, 118 of the escapees would successfully evade recapture, a remarkable number. The attack on Transport XX was over in minutes, but its impact was profound. It was a singular, brilliant moment of chaos and courage that punched a small but significant hole in the Nazis' perfected system of death. After the chaos subsided and the escaping prisoners melted into the Belgian night, the German guards regained control. The train, now with fewer passengers but under much heavier security, slowly resumed its grim journey towards Auschwitz. Of the 1631 people who had left Mechelen, 1,293 arrived at the death camp. Most were sent to the gas chambers immediately. The brief taste of freedom had ended, and the machinery of the Holocaust ground on. For the three heroes of the raid, the aftermath was perilous. They had succeeded in their mission, but had also made themselves top targets for the Gestapo. They split up and went into hiding, but the Nazi security apparatus was relentless. Youra Livschitz, the brilliant mind behind the operation, was betrayed and captured several weeks later. He was interrogated and tortured, but refused to give up his comrades. On February 17, 1944, he was executed by firing squad. He was just 26 years old. Jean Franklemon and Robert Maistriau were also eventually caught in separate incidents. They too faced brutal interrogations before being deported to concentration camps themselves. In a cruel twist of irony, they were sent into the very camp system they had fought to save others from. Both men, through sheer resilience and luck, managed to survive the horrors of the camps, including Buchenwald and Mittelbau-Dora, until they were liberated by Allied forces in 1945. The Nazi response to the attack was swift and predictable. Security measures on all subsequent transports from Mechelen were drastically increased. More guards were assigned, and the wagons were reinforced, making future escapes nearly impossible. The attack on Transport XX served as a wake-up call to the German authorities that their deportation process was vulnerable, and they moved quickly to seal those vulnerabilities. The raid was a singular event, a brief flash of light that, while saving over 100 lives, also caused the darkness to close in even tighter for those who followed. Behind the staggering statistics of the Holocaust are millions of individual human stories. The attack on Transport XX is no different. The number of 118 successful escapees represents 118 unique tales of survival, fear, and incredible fortune. Perhaps the most well-known is the story of Simon Gronowski. Just 11 years old, he was huddled with his mother, Chana, in the darkness of a cattle car when the train screeched to a halt. As others began to break open the doors, his mother made a split-second decision that would save his life. She pushed her small son towards the opening and told him to jump. Simon tumbled out of the moving train and into the night. He had a dislocated shoulder and was alone in the woods, but he was free. His mother remained on the train and perished in Auschwitz. For days, Simon wandered, terrified and hungry, until he stumbled upon a Belgian gendarme, a local policeman who, instead of turning him in, took him home and sheltered him. He was then passed to other brave Belgian families who hid him for the remainder of the war. Simon's story, is one of both profound loss and incredible kindness, a testament to the fact that in the midst of unimaginable evil, ordinary people were capable of extraordinary compassion. Another escapee, a young woman, fled into the woods and was eventually found by a lock keeper who gave her shelter in his small home by a canal. He risked his own life and the lives of his family to protect a complete stranger. These were not isolated incidents. The 118 survivors depended on a network of quiet, everyday heroes, farmers, priests, shopkeepers, and families, who opened their doors and shared their meager rations, forming an informal but vital chain of support that shielded the escapees from the German patrols that scoured the area. Each survivor carried with them the memory of that chaotic night, a complex mix of terror, guilt for those left behind, and overwhelming gratitude for the three young men who gave them a second chance at life. The raid on Transport XX holds a unique and powerful place in the history of the Second World War. It remains the only documented, organized attack on a Holocaust train by a resistance movement in all of occupied Europe. This fact alone makes it an event of profound historical significance. It stands in stark contrast to the persistent but unverified narratives of German railway workers or others derailing trains. While such stories make for powerful fiction, the historical record shows that the Nazi system of control over the railways was so absolute that such acts were virtually impossible. The Belgian operation was different. It was not an act of sabotage from within the system, but a direct, external assault on it. The legacy of the raid also helps to correctly frame other famous rescue operations. It was fundamentally different from the efforts of Sir Nicholas Winton, who saved 669 children through the Kindertransport before the war began, using legal and diplomatic channels. It also differed from the Kastner train, a negotiated transport that moved over 16,000 Jews to safety in Switzerland, an operation that involved complex and morally ambiguous deals with Nazi officials. The attack at Bort Meerbeek was a direct, confrontational act of armed resistance. It was a declaration that human lives would not be shipped like cattle without a fight. Today, the bravery of Youra Livschitz, Robert Maistriau, and Jean Franklemon is commemorated in Belgium. A monument stands near the site of the attack, a permanent reminder of their courage. The Dawson Barracks in Mechelen is now a museum and memorial dedicated to the Holocaust in Belgium. The legacy of Transport XX is not just in the 118 lives saved, but in its powerful symbolism. It proves that even in the face of an overwhelmingly powerful and evil regime, a few determined individuals with little more than a lantern and a belief in human dignity could make a stand, however briefly, and light up the darkness. Thank you for joining WW Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.